Hey everybody, we're just going to start a little series, frequently asked questions about fair funding. And the first one that I wanted to tackle, because it is the most foundational and it is right there in the name, Pennsylvanians for Fair Funding, is this idea of what is the fair funding formula? Because you'll hear us talk about how the formula isn't being used, or you'll hear us talk about how we don't have fair funding. What is fair funding, and kind of where are we getting that term? So right out of the gate, let's talk a little bit about equality and equity. These are both really important words, and mostly when we are talking about fair funding, you're going to hear the word equity the most. Equality means sameness. It means, and it has some really important uses in terms of when we're talking about how all people are equal in value. But equity is about making sure that people get what they need. And so you can see from that example there, not every student has the same needs. And not every student, has equal needs. Some have greater needs in some ways than others. And so it's important when we're talking about educating students that we are talking about equity, so that we are providing opportunity, giving each student what they need to succeed and what they need to thrive in life. So when we're talking about equity on a broad scale and we're talking about education funding, we can see that different states handle equity in funding differently. So in Indiana, all the way there to your right, they spend an average of 17% more on poor districts than on wealthy districts. And so what that means is that they're recognizing that students don't have equal needs. Students from poor communities, students who might be English language learners in some cases, they have a greater need. And not all communities are able to equally raise funds locally. And so Indiana recognizes that by directing money towards poorer districts who maybe cannot raise all of that money themselves. And on the flip side, you have Pennsylvania, all the way to the left, where we spend 33% less on poor districts overall. And that is kind of why we are where we are and why we're having this conversation, is because Pennsylvania has the most inequitable funding in the nation. Okay, and it's also worth noting that in Pennsylvania, just like in all states, education revenue comes from some different places. Pennsylvania is very heavy on local funding for schools, which means that if you're a wealthy community, you might have the ability to raise lots of money for your schools. And if you're a poorer community, you don't. So you can see about 35% of education funds come from the state in Pennsylvania. And just a little bit comes from the federal government and other sources, while the vast majority is coming from local property taxes. Okay. So in 2016, Pennsylvania adopted a fair funding formula, and that formula is for the state portion of the funds, and it takes into account student factors, community factors, and kind of tries to figure out what does each district need for their students from the state? How do we treat them equitably so that we're providing equal opportunity? So what goes into the formula? Student enrollment numbers, how many kids does a district have? Student need factors, including several poverty metrics and number of English language learners, because as it's been noted, some kids have greater need for in-school resources than others. And then community factors like local tax effort and median household income. In other words, what is the school district already doing to provide their own funding through taxes, and what are they able to do? What's their community wealth like? What's their community's income like? Because that will affect how much a district is able to raise on their own. Here's the problem now. Only 11% of the basic education funding is run through the fair funding formula. The rest is distributed through an old method that's often referred to as hold harmless. And basically what it means is, for a long time, the state said, and they're still saying to a degree, we will never give a district less than they got the year before. And that they did that because they were trying to spare districts who might be losing money, and were trying to make up for some of their stranded costs. And I want to just say I understand why they would do that. I understand the idea behind not wanting to take money away from districts. The problem is that when other districts are growing and have increasing need, and in many cases have increasing poverty, and there's no funding left over to equitably fund them, then something is off. And something's off when it's been nearly 30 years and some school districts are still getting money for students they had 30 years ago and don't have any more. There's just an inequity to keep using that word there. That's just, it's not sustainable. And ultimately, even though the phrase we use is hold harmless, because the idea of holding those districts who were having declining student populations harmless, the reality is it's actively harming over half of the students across Pennsylvania because they are not getting what they need to thrive, and to have the same opportunities as their neighbors. So it is not hold harmless. It is actually, in many ways, it's hold harmed. Okay. And so last thing I'm going to show you guys is this little chart. And you can see on the y-axis, you have what the students actually get in terms of money. And each one of these dots is a school district. And on the x-axis, you have what the students should get according to the formula. And so what we can see is there's a lot of school districts here that are getting way less or way more per student than the formula would say that it should. And so what we're seeing is, widespread inequity. If we had full equity, each school district would be lined up right on that dotted line. And yet what we're seeing is that some are getting significantly more than the fair funding formula would give to them, and some are getting significantly less. So we'll come back to this and talk some about the racial bias that is showing up even in this chart right here, and we'll talk about other issues. But for today, I think that's it. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section, and I will try to get back to them. Thank you.